I want to thank you all for coming out on such a beautiful day. I want to thank Mary for inviting me to come back to UBC. I did my postdoc here, which is, a really wonderful memory, and I always love coming back to see old friends and meet new ones. My voice is usually not this sultry, so I have to apologize in advance if I sound unintentionally sexy or unclear. I'll try to battle through. I think I will hold for about half an hour. Now, the material that I am presenting today actually comes from a side project, maybe a kind of a hobby almost, that was hovering on the margin of my mind when I was researching and writing my book on queer culture in post-colonial Hong Kong. The material came obviously out of my own intellectual interest and work on queer cinema, and out of several opportunities to write and talk about queer cinema from Asian perspectives. But just as strongly, many of my ideas are also rooted more personally from my experience as a queer Asian spectator who's experienced LGBT film festivals all over the world as a venue for debates, reflection, and community building. Those of you who participated in LGBT festivals know that it's often more than just films. People have great investment in it. So I just want to highlight that to show that what follows reflects both of these investments, both intellectual and personal. Now, films made in Asia that tell stories about sex that's not hetero or gender that is beyond male and female have arguably been around for a long time. But the idea of a queer Asian cinema as a body of work really became widely conceivable only in the late 1990s, when film festival programs, conference panels, academic journals all began to adopt the rubric with increasing frequency. One early example that was influential was in 2000 when Andrew Grossman edited a special issue of the Journal of Homosexuality on queer Asian cinema, the issue that was subsequently published as a book. In the introduction, ironically, Grossman actually cautions his readers that what he calls queer Asian cinema is a questionable category, that it reflects a cinematic Orientalism, and it's really more a marketing strategy that simplifies the body of foreign films into one digestible unit. However, precisely in publishing the special issue, Grossman has not only popularized the idea of a queer Asian cinema, but also coheres a disparate body of works under one unified object of study. 2 years later, in 2002, the influential San Francisco Lesbian and Gay Film Festival Frameline dramatically issues what they call a tsunami warning, a title that they gave to an extensive program of Asian films. The program notes explicitly asked the audience to look not only at individual films, but at the collective quality, content, and character of these queer-inspired Asian work. In the same year, I was invited to write a piece on queer Asian cinema in the revised edition of Bent Lens, A World Guide to Gay and Lesbian Film. Along with the emergence of transgender cinema, queer Asian cinema was deemed by the guide, the second edition, to be the hottest current development in queer cinema. Like Grossman, I was actually aware of the problematic implication of stringing together films that differ immensely in local context of production and reception, in their relation to social and political movement for gender and sexual minorities, and in their status in mainstream culture. I tried to pluralize the category as, it's a kind of cop-out, as queer Asian cinemas, while offering provisional subcategories to highlight the film's diversity. So I distinguish between three types, what I call queer mainstream, which are unintentionally queer films that wound up in queer film festival because they feature same-sex desire or gender transgressions, but without any overt or intentional commitment to queer politics. There are also these queer underground films that are made in society where queer content is outlawed, resulting in a style that is typical of guerrilla cinemas, often with lots of handheld works, undercover location shots, and active community involvement. I also find a queer diasporic cinema, which are films made from diasporic perspectives or about diasporic experience of queerness. Like Grossman's special issue, I think my piece in Bent Lens also further consolidates this somewhat provisional, somewhat fictitious category of queer Asian cinema. Now, when I say fictitious, I don't mean it the way Michael Moore meant it in his Oscar acceptance speech, in that it is false or unreal, because a fictitiously constructed category is actually enabled by very real material conditions, and once adopted, once it, become consolidated, it gives rise to equally real identity and community formations. My aim then is really not to contest or deconstruct a category, but I'm more interested in why a particular category catches on while others languish. Like one little example was, I also coined another term, queer third cinema, which is a category I rallied behind in another piece of writing, but that has inspired nary a film program nor a special journal issue. I'm also interested in exploring the kinds of interpretive strategies and spectatorial pleasures that a category like queer Asian cinema can inspire, as well as what it can limit and hinder. So a little kind of discursive history. To first answer the question why queer Asian cinema has caught on so readily and is still catching on, I want to situate its emergence more broadly within a discourse of queer Asia. In recent years, queer Asia has gained phenomenal visibility in Asia-based media culture, facilitated through sites like the prominent gay and lesbian portals utopiaasia.com and friday.com, both of which popularize as well as commodify a queer Asian identity amongst their users. So now you actually have netizens identifying as queer Asian because of these sites. Diasporic community-oriented groups like the Yellow Kitties in Melbourne, Australia, and community events like Lotus Roots right here in Vancouver mobilize queer Asian as a way to racialize queerness, which tends to be understood as white, and to queer non-Western ethnicities, which also tend to be understood as straight. In academic discourse, queer Asia is even on its way to becoming a field of study. As is typical of many forms of minority studies, the discursive formation of queer Asia is fueled by a need to challenge its exclusion. So sort of almost like in the vein of ethnic studies in the US, Asian American studies, and so forth. Because if you think about queer Asian as a formulation, in Asian studies, queer is even now not always respectable enough a word to utter. And in queer studies, where until very recently the focus has tended to remain exclusively Euro-American. One significant theoretical challenge to the Euro-American centrism of queer studies, and one which has, I think, created conditions fruitful for the later emergence of queer Asian studies, is the vibrant critique by diasporic critics of the globalization of gay identity, which some have kind of critically dubbed the global gay formation. Throughout the 1990s, a group of young scholars, predominantly queers of color in the US, have been writing from the perspective of queer diaspora. Their works seek to expose the universalizing, sometimes they even say imperialist, character of a discourse of sexual rights that presume its own global relevance, and for queer frameworks that are informed by postcolonial and anti-racist critiques. However, that focus on diaspora, in particular a notion of diaspora that is very specific to the context of the US, also limits the queer diasporic frameworks in crucial ways. Debates over those limits were significant, at times very tense, as I observed firsthand as the first International Queer Studies Conference held in London in 2004. One amongst many critical responses came from a group of Asianists, located either in Asia or in diasporic locations other than the US, so Australia, Canada, or Europe, who published a critical reflection on the conference in an issue of Inter-Asia Cultural Studies. Subsequently, after this, which was really quite a severe critique of the politics of the Queer Studies Conference, after this, the main instigator of that published reflection, the Australia-based Asia-Pacific Queer Network, held a conference in Bangkok in 2005 on queer Asian studies. The impressive volume of works that were presented there and the many inter-Asian networks that have since sprung up in its wake further the viability of queer Asia as a field of critical study. Now, while it is wonderful to have queer Asian conferences to go to and special journal issue devoted to the subject, this intense attention on queer Asia also has some problematic implications. One came from Taiwanese scholar Zhu Weicheng, who critiqued what he calls the metropolitan directionality of much of the discourse on queer Asia. Zhu attributes the dominant framework for thinking about queer Asia to theorist Dennis Altman's 1996 essay, Global Queering, which he later published as the book Global Sex.